Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and we really appreciate you joining us for today's episode. This is the second part of our first ever two-part episode. So if you haven't heard the first part yet, I would strongly suggest you start there, as we do cover a lot of ground. For those of you ready to proceed, I will remind you of where we left off. John Lee had been arrested, tried, and sentenced to death for the murder of his employer, Miss Emma Keyes. While the evidence was completely circumstantial, the punishment was very certain: hanged by the neck until dead. For 30 minutes, the officials at the Exeter prison in England tried to execute John Lee. He was positioned on the trapdoor and had the noose placed around his neck at least 3 times. The lever that operated the trapdoor was pulled many more times than that. Not to mention the officials jumping and stomping on the trapdoors, trying to get them to perform their gruesome duty. And just as he had dreamt the night before, John Lee was taken away from the gallows and led back to his cell, very much alive. But before we get to that, we are very excited that we have restarted tours in Kingston, Ontario. The original Haunted Walk of Kingston is now running as our brand new bubble tour. So these are small group tours with a maximum of 4 people from up to 2 different households. So I think these are going to be a great, safe, socially distanced way to get out there, hear some great ghost stories, almost like getting your very own private haunted walk. If you're around the Kingston area, certainly we'd love for you to come out and join us on these really unique tours that we'll be offering for a limited time. Information about those tours, and also to purchase gift certificates or to check out our new online gift shop, can be found on our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. Please be sure to follow us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all 3 at Haunted Walk. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to the show so you know when our new episodes are coming out. If you have a moment or two, we always appreciate getting 5-star reviews wherever you listen to us. And please feel free to recommend the show to anyone you know who enjoys the same dark and spooky content that we explore here. It is difficult to understate the contrast between John Lee sitting quietly in his cell, calmly eating what remained of his breakfast, and the pandemonium that was erupting in the crowds surrounding the jail. The delay in hoisting the black flag, which signaled the execution had been carried out, had caused a great deal of chatter. And when the idea that something was wrong occurred, the crowd rapidly swelled. When the newspaper reporters emerged from the prison, the scene baffled description. They were besieged by eager questioning, to which their only answer was a frantic rush to the post office to get their sensational copy on the wire. One reporter, overwhelmed by what he had seen, could not contain his emotions and went through the crowd shouting, "They cannot hang him," a cry which caught on and was repeated from mouth to mouth until the whole multitude was repeating it. And this is why John Lee is known as the man they couldn't hang. The next few days held a flurry of activity. First and foremost was the question, was it legal or moral to try to execute John Lee once again? As that question hung in the balance, Lee was actually taken out for exercise in the prison yard, in sight of his still open grave, which many years later, he said, was the most frightening part of the entire experience. The fact that John Lee had survived numerous execution attempts was believed by many to be a miraculous event, that it was only through divine intervention that John Lee lived. The evidence for this conclusion does give one pause. Throughout his court proceedings and imprisonment, John Lee maintained his innocence to virtually anyone who would listen. More than that, he repeatedly urged his family and friends to trust completely in God. He wrote the following letter to his sister just a few weeks before his execution date. Dear sister, we shall know the truth of this case. It is the same as you say it. It is hard to be punished when one knows that he did not do it. I will trust to the Lord and ask him to give me strength to bear all. The world's punishment is nothing after all for a better home above. Dear sister, I shall be very glad to see you and Father when you please to come. I was very pleased to hear that Mother got home all right. It is a heavy blow for you all. You must help Mother and Father. There is no doubt that the truth will come out after I am dead. It must be very hard-hearted to let me die for nothing. All the witnesses will and must appear before our Savior for what they have said against me, and to answer for my life. They think little of it now, but the time will soon come for them, and I hope they will be prepared to meet our Savior. I thank God I am not blind, as to not know what I have seen and what I have done. They have not told 6 words of truth. Give my love to Mother and Father and yourself. We must trust in the Lord. He will help us through all our trouble. He has helped me so far, and he will help me in the end. Your affectionate brother, John H. Lee. We also need to give further consideration to the prophetic dream that Lee had the night before his hanging was to take place. I have dreamt, he said to a guard, that I shall not be hanged today. I saw myself taken out to the scaffold, but it was not ready, and they brought me back again. Was it a miracle or a coincidence? If it was a coincidence, it certainly is a remarkable one. People who believe in premonitions and miracles may connect it with the strange happenings that followed, and Lee himself undoubtedly regarded it, as he does the whole series of occurrences by which his life was saved, in the light of divine intervention. His own words, written a few hours afterward, say, I believe that what has occurred was a miracle worked by the Lord. And also, it was the Lord's will that I should not die at the time appointed by man. It was not the fault of anyone that everything was not done to carry out the orders of the country. It was the Lord's hand that would not let the law be carried out. As a man of strongly religious tendencies, we can understand why Lee may have thought this way. The guard whom he told about the dream that fateful morning had a much different and more practical response. He told Lee, Don't thee build on that. Thee'st be hanged right enough. His perspective was soon to change. As a local newspaper reported, no man in the world was more astonished than the guard when he learned later that the dream did come true after all. He was not present at the execution scene, having gone off duty after being relieved at 6 o'clock, but was asleep in bed when his wife rushed upstairs to wake him with the news then ringing all over Exeter that they couldn't hang John Lee. It was his turn then to astonish her with the story of the dream, which he had not previously thought worth mentioning. The officials in England now had a significant issue to contend with. Despite a judicial edict which had decreed that he should be hanged by the neck until dead, John Lee had survived his execution through no fault of his own. Legally, this created an issue. Was a government able to take as many attempts as necessary to execute someone? At what point do all these false starts constitute an additional punishment beyond what the judge had handed down? Morally, this created an issue. The profound horror of the morning of the failed execution was not only felt by John Lee, but by all that were in attendance, including the prison officials, the chaplain, the newspaper reporters, and the executioner himself. Was it inhumane and beyond the punishment for his crime to subject John Lee and all of the others to another date with the gallows? Spiritually, this created an issue. Many people in the UK believed that God or some other supernatural entity had directly intervened to prevent the execution from taking place. That John Lee had been saved by some higher power for a reason, many believing that reason to be he was innocent of the crime. Could they spit in the face of a miracle and try to hang him again? How would the people respond? The decision went up to the highest levels of the British government, and even to Queen Victoria herself, who gave her blessing to have John Lee's death sentence commuted to life in prison. For 20 years, John Lee remained behind bars. As the anniversary of his botched hanging approached, an English newspaper began a series of columns about the crime, the execution, and why John Lee was still in jail. I would like to read you a little from those articles. If John Lee is guilty, has he not suffered sufficiently? Murderers whose sentences have been commuted under far less painful circumstances have been released in less than 20 years. Why in his case is only the quality of mercy restrained? So much if he be guilty, but what if he be innocent? By all the ordinary regulations of the English system, a life sentence meant at most a period of 20 years, which may be reduced by good behavior. It is a remarkable thing that while John Lee's conduct throughout his imprisonment has been good, so good indeed as to place him in the very highest merit class, it has not brought him any abatement of his time. And more remarkable still is the fact that he is now being kept in prison, although he has completed the full 20 years. So far, no explanation has been offered as to the cause of this exceptional treatment. It is generally supposed that the authorities are reluctant to release him on account of the sensation that is bound to attend his reappearance among men, and this especially in view of his constant protest that he is innocent. His frame of mind cannot be more strikingly illustrated than by an incident in connection with his very last letter from the Portland prison. As the end of his 20 years approached, he naturally concluded he was nearing the end of his imprisonment and addressed a petition to the Home Secretary. He also asked that he be allowed to grow his hair and beard out with the object of escaping general notice when he was finally released. The reply was as cruel as it was unexpected, all the more cruel because it came a day or two before Christmas. He was not to be liberated, nor was his case even allowed consideration. He was due to write his mother, and it fell to his lot to announce the hard tidings in that very letter in which she was expecting to hear news of his release. His way of putting it did not meet with the approval of prison authorities, who refused to let the letter pass, and supplied him with another form on which to write more in accordance with the official view of the matter. It is typical of the man that he calmly but firmly declined to do so. For a whole month, he bore the affliction of not being able to communicate with his mother and of knowing that she was suffering great anxiety on his account. And then, when he was again entitled to write, he deliberately said what he meant to, and the authorities, once more beaten by this man of quiet iron nerve, contented themselves with blacking out passages to which they objected, and then letting the letter go. Here's what he wrote. My dearest mother, you will see from the date of this letter that I have written to you as soon as I can. Dear mother, I wrote to you back on the 22nd of December last, but the letter was stopped by the order of the director. I had another form brought to me, but declined to write. Then, on the letter, you can see the next 4 lines have been blocked out, crossed through, unreadable, done so by the prison officials. The letter does continue the parts we can read. Dearest mother, I am very sorry to hear that you are not well, but I hope that it will please God to spare you a few more years yet and give you health and strength to bear it. I am so sorry that you thought I would not write to you. The newspaper article continues. The supremely sad thing is that it may not be in time of the faithful, patient country woman who, holding dearly to her son, whatever the world might think to them, has lived on all these years praying and hoping. She has outlived the husband and daughter who made up their bereaved family circle. Their portraits with her own hang beside his bed in the Portland prison. Even convict regulations have not denied him that slight favor. They did deny him the privilege of keeping also the portrait of himself, as he was before the awful fate which fell upon him. His parents sent it, but it was returned as against the rules. They kept it, and when his sister had died, the father and mother solemnly agreed that whichever should die first should take the portrait to the grave, that it might never fall again into curious or indifferent hands. The old man died 2 years ago last September and was buried in the village churchyard with the precious portrait near his heart. His mother goes about her little household duties and keeps the stiff upper lip one might expect of a mother of one who could face death without turning a hair. She will not talk to strangers about her son, but she will at times talk about her sad thoughts and weary hopes. To hear the man whom all regard as an extraordinary character is still the same simple country lad he was only shortly before this strange sequence of events unfolded. Her most sacred possessions are things which remind her of him. The concertina on which he had learned to strum God Save the Queen, his Sunday school prize books, and his discharge from the Navy, which he had joined when he was little more than 15. He might by this time have been home, a broad-shouldered petty officer with his medals and his pension, with the Victoria Cross maybe, if the need for proving his indomitable courage had ever arisen. That he is instead a convict is due to a severe illness which left him with a terrible case of pneumonia, and it was decided he was not strong enough for the service. How often must that poor, lonely mother think of these and many things as she stands at her cottage door, looking forth at the village courtyard where her loved ones lie, and out beyond the high road, along which she would feign to catch echo of those once familiar footsteps. It would make sweeter music in her ears than all the tongues of men or all the harps of angels. Will she ever hear those footsteps? Or will cold officialdom delay the liberation of this most unfortunate of captives until there is not even one last friend to welcome him, till in fact liberty will have become a greater burden than captivity. After this article was published, John Lee responded personally to the newspaper, and here's the article they wrote as a follow-up. John Lee, by letters, denounces his treatment and demands his release. Last week, the Sunday Chronicle gave a facsimile of a letter written by John Lee in Portland Prison, in which the authorities had blacked out with great precision certain references by the prisoner to his experiences at the hands of the law and his views upon being denied release. On a previous occasion, they had entirely suppressed a similar letter. Undeterred by these attempts to silence him, the convict has persisted in his endeavor to place his case before the public. On the 23rd of February, the 20th anniversary of the day upon which he was placed on the scaffold, he, for the third time, put down in black and white his views upon the position of affairs. For several days, the letter was under the consideration of prison authorities, who must have been more than a little perturbed by its outspoken character, its contents including a reiteration of his innocence, a charge of broken faith against the prison officials, a demand for release, and an appeal to the public. At any previous stage of his incarceration, it is but too probable that such a letter would have been promptly suppressed. But it would seem that in the present juncture, the authorities have thought it wiser not again to exercise their censorship, with the result the letter has been allowed to pass unabridged and reaches our hands at the moment of going to press. Its nature and significance will be readily perceived from the following extract. John Lee wrote, "Ask a member of Parliament to ask the Home Secretary in Parliament when I am going to be released from prison. He is bound to give them an answer. He cannot say he does not know. I wish you would write to all the newspapers and also get up a public petition for me. I'm sure there are hundreds and thousands of people in England and Ireland who would sign it because they believe I am innocent of the crime. It is a great consolation to me to know that most people believe in my innocence. I don't suppose there has been a man in any country made to go through and suffer the same as they have made me go through. This is some of it. Nearly 3 months waiting trial. Sentence of death passed upon me. 3 weeks under that awful sentence. 3 times led to the gallows. Each of these times the trap did not drop and left me standing upon my heels and toes. Taken back to my cell. That same and following days, I was taken out and made to exercise in the site of the grave dug to receive my body. For 4 weeks, I was kept in terrible suspense of being put to it again at any hour during that time, before the governor of the Exeter prison came and told me that Her Majesty the Queen had been pleased to commute my sentence to penal servitude for life. He told me that it was 20 years. I have done my 20 years with good character, and now they think I have not suffered enough? They will not release me, nor hold out any hopes of release. 20 years today it pleased God to save me from a horrible death, but death is preferable to 20 years in prison. Signed, John Lee. After publishing Lee's letter, the newspaper was inundated with letters from every corner of the UK, all of them sympathetic to his case. Here is a man lying in one of His Majesty's jails since 1885, wrote a Manchester correspondent, after going through the excruciating experience of being 3 times through the hangman's hands. Surely that punishment is sufficient to expiate his crime. I am surprised to see that he is nowhere nearer liberation than he was when he was first placed in the jail. I feel strongly, a writer from Ireland noted, that justice should be tampered with mercy. I am very much inclined to write the Home Secretary, as I feel that even if this man is guilty, he has suffered sufficient in having been 3 times taken out to be hanged, and since then undergone more than 20 years of penal servitude. Among all of these letters, there is a few that are quite interesting, and one in particular. A gentleman suggested that John Lee may have been gifted with magnetic powers, which enabled him to keep the drop from falling. Kind of a precursor to Magneto. One letter the newspaper received of particular note was from a former prison guard, who wrote, "While stationed in Portsmouth some 15 years ago, I was on 3 occasions put on guard over the convict. Amongst the prisoners was Lee. As you can readily imagine, from the unusual incidents connected with the attempts to hang him, he was an object of considerable interest to us. The convict squads had to pass our guard room several times a day, and Lee, being amongst the murderers and wearing their distinctive dress, was a conspicuous figure. Nothing about him, however, was so noticeable as his non-convict countenance. All the remainder of his comrades, some 60 in number, were of a certain type, but he was a man apart in such a company as that, which ranged from the common criminal of the slums to the cultivated criminal of the university. Lee looked and moved like a good man. Having read the trial at the time, encountering him so unexpectedly 5 years afterwards made a deep impression on my mind and convinced me that he was innocent. Such being my conviction, I wish Godspeed to his effort to gain his freedom." While all this press coverage did not immediately result in Lee's release, it did set the stage for it, as several financially and politically powerful individuals began to work and petition for his case. In December of 1907, after 23 years, John Lee was released from prison. At the time of his release, he was the longest-serving inmate in the British prison system. Thankfully, Lee's mother was still alive, which led to a very happy reunion. She passed away the following year. Lee tried to use his notoriety for his benefit. He became a bit of a minor celebrity, touring the country, giving his own version of the story, which he ended up publishing in an autobiography in 1912 called The Man They Could Not Hang. A silent film of his story was also made that year. After his release, he married a local woman in January of 1909, with whom he fathered 2 children. Then, he suddenly disappeared. The man they couldn't hang became the man they couldn't find. What added an additional layer of confusion and complication to this is that several people in the UK were routinely claiming to be John Lee. People loved to hear his story and would buy those claiming to be him countless rounds of drinks with each telling of the tale. This mystery persisted for over 80 years until historical researchers were able to figure out what had happened to him. And here comes another twist in our story. In 1911, 4 years after being released from prison, and only 2 years after getting married, John Lee boarded a boat headed to New York City, with his mistress posing as his wife. He had completely abandoned her and his children and left them destitute, and as a result, his wife was forced into a workhouse. In the US, John and his new wife had a daughter, Evelyn, and he managed to work successfully throughout the Great Depression as a shipping clerk for a car company. However, fate had one more dark twist to throw John Lee's way. His American daughter, Evelyn, who worked as a maid, tragically died at the age of 19 from accidental asphyxiation from the cleaning products she was using to clean a bathroom. If we choose to believe that John Lee was saved from the gallows by divine intervention, could we not see the death of his daughter as divine retribution for quickly abandoning his wife and children in England? John Lee, the man they couldn't hang, at the age of 80, passed away on March 19th, 1945, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, bringing a conclusion to a life and a story far stranger than fiction. Thank you so much for joining us for the episode. Something I'd like to point out, if you're interested in seeing what John Lee looked like, jump on our website hauntedwalk.com/podcasts, and the artwork for part 1 of the episode is a close-up of Lee's face before he went into prison. And then the artwork for part 2, this episode, is his face after or near the end of his term in jail. And you can see the stark difference. Quick reminder that if you are in the Kingston area, we definitely want to have you out on our brand new bubble tours there. Help us have a great restart and relaunch as we get back to doing what we do best, of course, which is telling great stories. And our tour guides are really chomping at the bit to dust off their cloaks and lanterns and get out there. Information about all of our tours, as well as where you can buy gift certificates and check out the links to our online gift shop, is our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all 3 at Haunted Walk. Be sure to subscribe to the show if you have not done so already, and we always love getting 5-star reviews from you wherever you listen to us. As always, a heartfelt thanks to our Haunted Talks team, including Michelle Dennis, our outstanding audio editor, and Kevin McLeod at incompetech.com for the additional music. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.